The doors to your own home slam shut, not by accident, not by fate, by the hands of your own daughter, and as you stand on the porch in the fading light, your key useless in your trembling hand, you realize that sometimes the people who hurt us the most are the ones we loved enough to trust completely. Hello, friends. My name is Eleanor, and I'm so grateful you're here, listening to this story with me today. Before I begin, I want you to know, this story is filled with truth, betrayal, love, and redemption. Each story we share touches the soul and reveals what really happens behind closed doors. Before I begin my story, let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is. I just want to know I'm not alone in this. And if you feel moved by what you hear, consider subscribing to Grandma's True Stories. It helps more people become aware of the reality of elder abuse and family betrayal. Now, let me tell you what really happened. Maggie Hayes stood in her kitchen on a Tuesday morning in September, sunlight streaming through the same lace curtains she'd hung there 42 years ago. She was 72 years old, and she was exactly where she wanted to be. The house smelled like coffee and the fresh bread she'd baked the night before. Outside, the garden she'd tended for decades was in its late summer glory. Roses still blooming red and gold, the herb garden thriving despite the heat. This house wasn't just a place where Maggie lived. It was the repository of her entire life. She'd moved into this home as a young bride in 1982, her hand in her husband Robert's hand as he carried her across the threshold. They'd raised 2 children here. They'd held birthday parties and holiday gatherings. They'd painted the walls together, fixed the roof, planted trees that now towered over the front lawn. When Robert was diagnosed with cancer 15 years ago, she'd cared for him in the master bedroom upstairs. When he died, she'd sat alone in this kitchen for 3 days, barely eating, barely moving, just breathing in the memory of him in every corner. But Maggie was not a woman broken by grief. She was a woman forged by it. She'd been a high school English teacher for 38 years before retiring last spring. Her students had loved her, not because she was easy, but because she cared. She graded papers at the kitchen table late into the night. She attended their plays and their graduations. She wrote recommendation letters that opened doors. She changed lives without ever asking for anything in return. Her colleagues threw her a retirement party in June. There were flowers and cake and speeches about what she meant to the school. But what meant more to Maggie was the freedom. For the first time in 4 decades, she had time. Time to read the books stacked beside her bed. Time to volunteer at the library. Time to finally take that painting class she'd always wanted to take. Time to simply be. Her days had a rhythm now. She woke early, made coffee, sat on the back porch with a book or a sketch pad. She walked to the farmer's market on Saturday mornings. She had lunch with her friends from the book club. She volunteered 3 afternoons a week at the community center, where she taught art to children and helped seniors with their computers. "You're glowing," her friend Susan had said just the week before. "Retirement looks good on you, Maggie." Maggie had smiled. She was glowing. For the first time in years, she felt free. Free from the weight of lesson plans and grading. Free to be curious about the world again. Free to think about what she wanted, not what she should be doing. But there was a shadow creeping at the edges of her happiness. A shadow with her daughter's name on it. Patricia had called on Monday. "Mom, we need to talk about the house," she'd said without preamble, her voice tight with something that sounded like frustration. "What about the house?" Maggie had asked, though she already knew what was coming. This conversation had been building for months. "You can't possibly stay there alone. It's too much for you. You're not getting any younger, Mom. The upkeep is exhausting. You should think about moving into one of those nice senior communities. They have activities and..." "Patricia, I'm fine. I'm healthy. I'm active. I don't need..." "You're 72 years old living in a 5-bedroom house by yourself. It's not practical and frankly, it's dangerous. What if you fall? What if something happens and you're alone?" This was the refrain Maggie had heard countless times over the past 6 months. It always came wrapped in concern, but underneath was something harder. Something that sounded like judgment. Maggie's son David lived in Seattle. He called her once a week, sent her pictures of his granddaughter, asked if she needed anything. But Patricia lived 40 minutes away in the suburbs, and she'd become increasingly involved in Maggie's affairs. It had started innocently enough. Patricia had suggested Maggie sign a power of attorney, just in case, just for emergencies, she'd said. "If you ever need help managing finances or medical decisions, I should have the authority to act quickly." At the time, it had seemed reasonable. Maggie had been in her early 60s then, Robert had just died, and she was grateful for Patricia's concern. The lawyer had made it official. Patricia had the power to make decisions on her behalf. But as the years passed, that power had begun to feel like a noose tightening slowly around Maggie's neck. Patricia had started helping with her finances. She'd suggested moving money into accounts Patricia could access. She'd offered to take over bill payments. She'd hinted, not so subtly, that Maggie should consider putting the house in both their names, for tax purposes. Maggie had resisted each time. She loved her daughter, but something in her gut whispered a warning. Something old and instinctual said, keep your own power. Don't give it all away. I'm not moving, Maggie had told Patricia firmly on Monday. This is my home, I'm staying. The silence on the other end of the line had been cold. We'll see about that, Patricia had finally said, and then she'd hung up. Now, on this Tuesday morning, Maggie pushed that conversation aside. She had a painting class at noon. She'd made an appointment with the dentist for next week. Life was full and good. She wouldn't let Patricia's mood and pressure dampen her newfound joy. Maggie poured another cup of coffee and settled into the worn armchair by the window, the same chair where Robert used to read the Sunday paper, the same chair where she'd sat through countless nights. Sometimes grieving, sometimes simply existing in the quiet of the house. She opened her sketch pad. She'd been working on a series of watercolors depicting the changing seasons. Today she would paint autumn. The trees turning gold and crimson, leaves falling like rain. She didn't know that in less than 48 hours, her entire world would change. She didn't know that her trust would become her greatest vulnerability. She didn't know that the security she felt in this moment was an illusion, one carefully constructed by a daughter who had been planning something darker than Maggie could have imagined. All she knew was the feel of the brush in her hand, the smell of the coffee growing cold beside her, and the sunlight on her face through the lace curtains. All she knew was this moment, and she was grateful. The text came through on Wednesday afternoon. Maggie was at the community center, helping a 78-year-old man named Harold navigate his new smartphone. She'd just shown him how to open his email when her own phone buzzed in her pocket. She almost didn't look at it. But something made her. Some invisible tug that told her to check. The message was from Patricia. It came through as a screenshot of what looked like it had been texted to Patricia's friend. Maggie had to read it 3 times before the words actually made sense. What changed all the locks? You don't have a home anymore. Let's see how brave you are now. Maggie's hands went numb. The phone nearly fell to the floor. Mrs. Hayes. Are you okay? Harold's voice seemed to come from very far away. Maggie's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Her eyes were fixed on the words, her daughter's words, about her home, about locks, about not having a home. I'm sorry, Harold. I need to make a call. Can you excuse me for just a moment? She walked outside into the September heat, her legs moving on autopilot. The parking lot was nearly empty. She found a bench by the entrance and sat down hard, staring at the phone in her hands. Below the screenshot there was another message from Patricia. Mom, don't bother coming back to the house. Your things are in boxes on the porch. David helped me, so don't even bother calling him. You're going into a home. It's time to face reality. You're old. You're alone. And frankly, you're in the way. The words blurred. Maggie read them again and again, trying to make them mean something different, trying to find some alternate interpretation where this wasn't real. But it was real. The cruelty in those words was absolutely, unmistakably real. She called Patricia 3 times. The calls went straight to voicemail. She tried David. His phone rang and finally he answered out of breath. Mom, hey, I was just... Did you help Patricia change the locks? There was a long silence. David, Mom, it's complicated. Patricia said you were being unreasonable about moving, and she thought if circumstances changed, you'd be more willing to consider a senior community and... Did you help her lock me out of my home? Oh, Mom, it's not like that. Your things are... Maggie hung up. She sat on the bench in the heat, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. Her own son. Her daughter. They had conspired together to lock her out of the house where she'd raised them. The house where their father had died. The house that held 40 years of memories and love and sacrifice. The house that was supposed to be hers. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was an email. The sender's name was unfamiliar, Marcus Chen, attorney at law. The subject line read, O.R. Jen, your mother's estate. With shaking fingers, Maggie opened the email. Dear Ms. Hayes, I am writing to inform you that my client, Patricia Hayes, has filed a petition with the court based on a previously executed power of attorney document dated March 15, 2009. This petition seeks to establish a conservatorship over your financial and personal affairs, citing concerns about your ability to manage your property independently. Additionally, Ms. Hayes has submitted a request to transfer the deed of the property located at 247 Ashwood Lane into her name, citing the power of attorney agreement. We have a serious problem. The locks have already been changed. Your access to the property has been restricted. Ms. Hayes claims this is for your own protection, but there are significant legal irregularities with how this has been handled. You need to contact an attorney immediately. This situation requires urgent legal intervention. Respectfully, Marcus Chen Chen and Associates Law. Maggie read the email with the sensation of falling. Everything was spinning. The ground beneath her feet seemed to have vanished. She was 72 years old. She was healthy. She was independent. She had been paying her own bills, managing her own finances, and living her own life. And yet her daughter had somehow, using a piece of paper from 13 years ago, managed to lock her out of everything. The power of attorney, that innocuous document, that act of trust. Maggie sat on that bench for an hour. She didn't cry. She didn't call anyone else. She simply sat, holding her phone, reading the words over and over as if repetition might change their meaning. Finally, as the sun began to set, she did something she hadn't done in years. She called her brother Michael, who lived 2 states away. "Oh my God," Michael said when she told him everything. "Oh my God, Maggie, listen to me. You need a lawyer. Right now, today. This is elder abuse. This is financial exploitation. This is..." He was sputtering with rage. "I'm calling you back in 5 minutes. Don't do anything until we talk," Michael called back. He'd already found a lawyer in her area, someone recommended by a friend who specialized in elder law and family disputes. Her name was Rebecca Torres, and she was taking Maggie as an emergency client. "You need to get to her office before it closes," Michael said. "It's 4:47 p.m. right now. Can you get there?" Maggie looked at her phone. Rebecca Torres's office was 20 minutes away. She could make it. She drove there in a daze, not quite believing any of this was happening. When she parked in front of the small brick office building, she gripped the steering wheel and allowed herself, for the first time that day, to cry. She cried for the betrayal. She cried for the trust that had been shattered. She cried for the life she'd thought was secure, but had apparently been crumbling beneath her all along. She cried for her son David, who had apparently sided with his sister over his own mother. But underneath the tears was something else. Something harder. Something that would, in the days and weeks to come, become the core of her strength. It was anger. Pure, clarifying, galvanizing anger. And Maggie Hayes was done being a victim. Rebecca Torres's office smelled like old wood and leather. The furniture was worn but comfortable. The kind of place where people came with their worst problems and left with at least the possibility of hope. Maggie sat across from Rebecca at a mahogany desk, her purse clutched in her lap, feeling small and lost. Rebecca was a woman in her late 50s, with steel gray hair pulled back in a no-nonsense bun and eyes that had clearly seen every variation of human cruelty that the legal system had to offer. She listened without interruption as Maggie told her everything. The power of attorney, Patricia's pressure, the text message, the email from the lawyer, the boxes on the porch. When Maggie finished, Rebecca leaned back in her chair and was quiet for a long moment. "What you're describing is elder abuse?" Rebecca finally said. Her voice was calm but firm. "Specifically, financial exploitation and unlawful eviction. The power of attorney your daughter holds gives her certain powers, but not unlimited ones. She cannot simply lock you out of your home. She cannot transfer your property without following proper legal procedures. And she certainly cannot do either of these things as part of a scheme to gain control over your assets. Can you? Can you fix this?" Maggie's voice sounded small and fragile to her own ears. "I can fight this," Rebecca said. "But I need to be honest with you. The next 72 hours are critical. We need to file an emergency petition to revoke the power of attorney. We need to establish that Patricia obtained and used this document fraudulently. We need to get you back into your home before she has time to file additional paperwork or transfer the deed." Maggie felt the room tilt slightly. She can really do that? Transfer my home? If we don't stop her, yes. That's the whole point of what she's done. She's moving quickly because she knows you'll eventually figure it out. Right now, she has the power of attorney and she's using it. She's betting that you'll be confused, scared, or too ashamed to fight back. I'm not ashamed, Maggie said quietly. I'm angry. Rebecca smiled slightly. Good. You're gonna need that anger. Now I need to ask you some hard questions. Do you have documentation of any communication between you and Patricia where she mentions wanting the house? Any emails or texts about your finances? Any witnesses to conversations where she pressured you to sign over control? Maggie thought. There are text messages and emails. I don't know if they prove anything, but they're there. Good. I'll need those. What about David? Is he still willing to help Patricia? I don't know, Maggie said. He sounded like he was just going along with it. Like he didn't really understand what they were doing. We might be able to use that, Rebecca said. People often regret acting impulsively. If David realizes the seriousness of what they've done, he might flip. That would be enormously helpful to your case. They spent the next 2 hours going through documents. Rebecca prepared an emergency petition. She explained the legal process in terms Maggie could understand. She outlined Maggie's options. You can stay in a hotel tonight, Rebecca said, or with a friend. We'll file the emergency petition first thing in the morning. Then we go to court and ask the judge for an emergency order to change the locks back and restore your access to your home, pending the full hearing. Will the judge grant that? Maggie asked. Probably, Rebecca said. What Patricia did, locking you out without a legal eviction process, is clearly illegal. The judge will likely see it as an emergency situation that requires immediate intervention. When Maggie left Rebecca's office, it was nearly 7 p.m. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. She sat in her car in the parking lot and allowed herself to think about what came next. She couldn't go home. Her home had boxes on the porch with her life packed into them. The locks had been changed by her own daughter. The man she'd raised and loved and supported through his own struggles had helped her do it. She called Susan, her friend from book club. Can I stay with you tonight? She asked. Of course, honey. I'm coming to get you right now. Where are you? Susan arrived 30 minutes later. She took one look at Maggie's face and didn't ask questions. She simply wrapped her arms around her friend and held her while Maggie finally, truly broke down. They drove to Susan's house in silence. Susan made tea. She put fresh sheets on the guest room. She sat with Maggie on the edge of the bed as the evening darkness settled outside the windows. Tell me, Susan said simply, and so Maggie told her. Everything. The whole story from the beginning. From Robert's death and her grief and her slow rebuilding of a life, to Patricia's increasing pressure, to the power of attorney that had seemed like such a small thing, to the text message that had shattered her world. When she finished, Susan took her hand. You're going to get through this, Susan said. And you're going to be okay. Not because it won't hurt, because it will. But because you're stronger than you know. I've known you for 20 years, Maggie. I've watched you survive things that would have broken other people. This will not break you. Maggie wanted to believe that. She wanted to feel strong and resilient, and like she could survive anything. But tonight, in Susan's guest room, surrounded by the belongings of someone else's life, she just felt hollow and lost. She lay in the dark and thought about the house, about the garden, about the kitchen where she'd baked bread, and the bedroom where Robert had died, and the porch where she'd sat watching the sunset countless times. About the 40 years of her life contained within those walls. And she thought about Patricia. About the daughter she'd helped through college. The daughter she'd babysat for countless afternoons while Patricia worked. The daughter she'd supported through a divorce and a difficult job and years of financial struggles. The daughter who had decided that her mother's worth was measured only in the value of her assets. Outside, the September night deepened. Somewhere in that darkness, Maggie's home stood empty, waiting. The morning came too early. Maggie woke at 5 a.m., her heart already racing, her mind already spinning through everything that needed to happen. She lay in Susan's guest bed, listening to the house settling around her, and made a decision. She wasn't going to be a passive victim in this story. She wasn't going to wait for Rebecca to fix everything for her. She was going to fight. By 7 a.m., she was on her laptop, Susan's laptop, borrowed without explanation, going through every email and text message she could find. She created a document. She organized everything chronologically. She annotated, she noted. She built a timeline of Patricia's pressure, her subtle manipulations, her increasing demands. There were emails from 3 years ago where Patricia had suggested putting the house in both their names for estate planning purposes. There were texts from 2 years ago where Patricia had asked about Maggie's bank accounts. For convenience. There were messages from just last month where Patricia had said, "Mom, I'm really concerned about you being alone. Wouldn't you feel safer if I had more direct access to your finances?" It was all there. A paper trail of grooming, of slowly, methodically convincing an aging mother to surrender control of her own life. Maggie took screenshots of everything. She printed it all out. Her hands shook as she organized the pages into neat stacks. Susan found her at 8 a.m. surrounded by papers, coffee gone cold beside her. "Oh, honey," Susan said softly. "I need to go get my things," Maggie said. From the porch. "I need to see what she did. And I need to understand something." "What do you need to understand? Why? Why would she do this? We had a good relationship. Or at least, I thought we did." They drove to the house at 9 a.m. Rebecca had advised against this, but Maggie needed to see it with her own eyes. The house looked the same from the outside. The same red brick, the same garden, the same porch where she'd sat 1,000 times. But the front door had a new lock, and on the porch were 7 cardboard boxes, haphazardly stacked, some of them already damaged. Maggie got out of the car slowly. Susan stayed beside her, her hand on Maggie's elbow, as if Maggie might shatter and Susan needed to be there to catch the pieces. The boxes contained clothes. Maggie's favorite sweater was crumpled at the bottom of one. Her reading glasses were in another. Her jewelry box, not even unopened, but rifled through, contained most of her things. Her grandmother's pearls were there. Her wedding ring from Robert was in a Ziploc bag. It was cruel. Not accidentally cruel, but deliberately, methodically cruel. These weren't the essentials a daughter would pack for an aging mother moving to a new place. These were the items of a woman who had been summarily ejected from her own home. Garbage bag treatment of a lifetime of memories. "We need to document this," Susan said. She pulled out her phone and began taking pictures of everything. Maggie reached for one of the boxes and pulled out a photo album. She opened it carefully. Pictures of Patricia and David as children. Pictures of family vacations. Pictures of Robert holding his newborn daughter, his face radiant with pride and love. "I gave her everything," Maggie whispered. "I gave her my time, my energy, my love. I supported her through everything, and this is what I get." Before Susan could answer, a car pulled into the driveway. It was Patricia's car. Patricia got out, and for a moment, Maggie felt something break inside her. This was her daughter, the child she'd carried in her body, the girl she'd raised, the woman she'd loved unconditionally for 48 years. But Patricia's face was hard cold, like she was looking at a stranger. "You shouldn't be here," Patricia said. "This is my home," Maggie said quietly. "Not anymore. My lawyer said. Your lawyer is committing elder abuse on your behalf. Do you understand that? Do you actually understand what you've done?" Patricia's jaw tightened. "What I've done is what's best for you. You're too old to be living alone in this house. You need professional care. You need to be somewhere safe. You could have had a conversation with me about that," Maggie said, her voice rising. "You could have talked to me like an adult, like a daughter who respected her mother. Instead, you locked me out like I'm a criminal. You wouldn't listen." Patricia snapped. "You never listen. You just do whatever you want. And I've spent my whole life trying to make sure you're okay, and you throw it in my face by refusing to accept help." "Help," Maggie laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. "Is that what you call using a power of attorney I gave you in good faith to lock me out of my own home? Is that what you call throwing my things on a porch like garbage?" "Patricia, my lawyer explained it to me. You're committing fraud, you're committing elder abuse, and you're going to face legal consequences for it." Patricia's face went pale. "You hired a lawyer?" "Of course I hired a lawyer. Did you think I was just going to roll over and let you steal my home?" "I'm not stealing anything," Patricia's voice cracked. "I'm trying to help." "I have debt, Mom. I have credit card debt and medical bills, and my car is about to be repossessed. This house is worth 800 zalozen. That's money I could use to fix my life. That's money I deserve. I'm your daughter. I'm supposed to inherit it anyway. I'm just moving up the timeline." There it was, the truth, finally spoken aloud. Maggie felt something crystallize inside her. All the doubt, all the second guessing herself, all the guilt about possibly being unfair to Patricia, it all burned away. "You're not my daughter right now," Maggie said quietly. "Right now, you're a woman who tried to steal from her mother. And I'm going to make sure everyone knows that." "Mom, don't," Maggie held up her hand. "I don't want to hear it. You wanted to see if I was brave. Fine. You're about to find out how brave I am." Maggie turned to Susan. Help me get these boxes into the car. They loaded the boxes while Patricia stood frozen on the porch, watching. When they were finished, Maggie got into the passenger seat. Susan started the engine. As they pulled away, Maggie didn't look back. She kept her eyes forward. But her mind was already 3 steps ahead, already planning the next move. That afternoon, she met with Rebecca again. She showed her the photos. She showed her the emails and the screenshots and the timeline she'd created. She told Rebecca about Patricia's confession, that she was doing this because of debt. Rebecca's eyes hardened. This is even clearer cut than I thought. She admitted her motivation to you. She did. I have a witness. Susan heard it. She's in the other room. I asked her to stay nearby. Rebecca stood up. We're going to court tomorrow morning. I'm filing an emergency restraining order, free. I'm going to ask the judge to not only revoke the power of attorney, but to freeze all of Patricia's access to your accounts and your home, free. And I'm going to recommend that the judge refer this matter to the state's elder abuse hotline. That night, Maggie sat in Susan's living room and called her brother Michael. She told him everything, about Patricia's confession, about the boxes on the porch, about the legal filing happening tomorrow. She's stealing from you, Michael said, his voice cold with fury. And she's doing it by exploiting the power of attorney you trusted her with. Maggie, I'm so sorry. I should have warned you years ago that this could happen. You couldn't have known, Maggie said. I couldn't have known. I trusted my own daughter, and that was my mistake. She also called David. It took 3 tries before he answered. Mom, he sounded uncertain, defensive. I need to know if you understand what you did, Maggie said quietly. I need you to tell me that you understand that you helped your sister lock your mother out of her home. Mom, I didn't think. That's right. You didn't think. You went along with Patricia's plan without asking questions, without thinking about what it would mean, without considering that it's illegal. Do you understand that what you did is elder abuse? There was a long silence. I didn't know, David finally said, and Maggie could hear tears in his voice. I didn't understand what Patricia was doing. She said you needed to be protected. She said you were being stubborn about moving. I thought it was going to be this intervention thing, and you'd see that you needed help, and then it would all be fine. It's not fine, Maggie said. It's not fine at all. I'm taking legal action, David. Against Patricia, and depending on what happens, I may need to take legal action against you too. Mom, please don't do that. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know. Then tomorrow you're going to come to court and tell the judge that. You're going to tell the judge exactly what you did and that you didn't understand the consequences. And you're going to pray that the judge believes you. She hung up before he could respond. That night Maggie slept better than she had since the text message. Tomorrow she would fight. Tomorrow she would stand in front of a judge and tell her story. Tomorrow she would take back her life. The courthouse was a gray stone building that had stood in downtown for 50 years. Maggie had never been inside it before. She'd never needed to. She'd lived a quiet, law-abiding life. The idea of standing before a judge, of having her private family trauma aired in public, made her stomach turn. But she also knew that this was necessary. That sometimes, you had to stand in front of the whole world and say, this happened to me, and it was wrong. Rebecca met her in the hallway outside the courtroom at 9:30 a.m. She was carrying a leather briefcase and had the calm, focused demeanor of a woman who had fought this fight many times before. How are you feeling? Rebecca asked. Terrified, Maggie said honestly. And angry. Mostly angry. Good, use that anger. The judge needs to understand not just the facts of what happened, but the emotional reality of being betrayed by your own family. They walked into the courtroom. It was smaller than Maggie expected, and surprisingly quiet. The judge was a woman in her 60s, with sharp eyes and an expression that suggested she had seen every variety of human cruelty. Patricia was already there, sitting next to a man in an expensive suit, her lawyer, presumably. She looked smaller than Maggie remembered, more fragile. She was wearing a navy suit and minimal makeup. She looked like she was trying very hard to appear sympathetic. David sat in the back of the courtroom. When he saw Maggie, he looked away. The judge called the case. Rebecca stood and presented the emergency petition to revoke the power of attorney. She presented the timeline of events. She presented the screenshots of text messages and emails showing Patricia's pattern of pressure and manipulation. Then it was Patricia's turn. Patricia's lawyer stood and began his argument. He portrayed Patricia as a concerned daughter trying to help an aging mother who was refusing necessary care. He suggested that the power of attorney was being used legitimately, in Maggie's best interests. "Your Honor," he said, "my client is not trying to steal from her mother. She's trying to protect her." The locks were changed because Ms. Hayes was refusing to accept professional help. Sometimes family members have to take difficult steps to ensure the safety of their elderly relatives. Difficult steps like locking them out of their home without a legal eviction process. The judge asked, her voice sharp, perhaps not handled optimally, the lawyer admitted. But the intent was never malicious. "Then why did your client text her mother that she doesn't have a home anymore, and ask, 'Let's see how brave you are now'?" the judge asked. She held up her phone. Rebecca had submitted screenshots as evidence. "Those don't sound like the words of someone trying to help. Those sound like the words of someone trying to humiliate." Patricia's lawyer floundered. "Your Honor, that text was sent in the heat of the moment. My client regrets." "Does your client regret it, or does she regret being caught?" The judge interrupted. Rebecca stood. "Your Honor, I'd like to call my first witness." Susan took the stand. She testified that she had been with Maggie when she received the text messages. She testified that she had heard Patricia's confession about needing money to pay off debt. She testified that she had seen Maggie's belongings thrown onto the porch in damaged boxes. Then Rebecca called Maggie to the stand. Maggie walked to the front of the courtroom, placed her hand on the Bible, and swore to tell the truth. She sat down in the witness box and tried to steady her breathing. Rebecca began gently, "Ms. Hayes, can you tell the court about your relationship with your daughter?" "I loved her," Maggie said simply. "I still love her. I raised her. I supported her through college. I babysat her children. I was there for her through a divorce. I thought we had a good relationship." "And when did you sign the power of attorney?" 13 years ago. About 2 years after my husband died." Patricia suggested it. "She said it was just a precaution, in case something happened to me. I didn't think much about it." "Did you ever give Patricia permission to lock you out of your home?" "No. Absolutely not." "Did you ever discuss moving into a senior community?" "Patricia brought it up many times. I always told her I wasn't interested. I told her I was healthy and independent. But she kept pushing. And when you refused to comply with what she wanted, what happened?" Maggie took a breath. "She locked me out. She changed the locks on the house my husband and I bought 40 years ago. A house where I raised her. A house where my husband died. She threw my belongings on the porch in boxes and told me I didn't have a home anymore. How did that make you feel?" Maggie's voice cracked. "It made me feel like I was worthless. It made me feel like all the years I spent loving her and supporting her meant nothing. It made me feel like I had been betrayed by the person I trusted most in the world." She paused. She could see Patricia looking at her phone, refusing to make eye contact. "But it also made me angry," Maggie continued, her voice strengthening. "It made me angry enough to fight back. Because I realized that I wasn't the problem here. Patricia was. And I wasn't going to let her make me feel ashamed for being too trusting." Rebecca nodded. "One more question, Miss Hayes. Are you capable of managing your own affairs?" "Yes," Maggie said firmly. "I teach art. I volunteer at the community center. I manage my own finances. I manage my own home. I am fully capable. The only thing I can't do is convince my daughter to respect me." Rebecca finished her questions. Then Patricia's lawyer stood to cross-examine. "Ms. Hayes, isn't it true that your daughter was concerned about your safety living alone?" She said she was. "But that concern didn't require her to lock me out of my home. Isn't it true that you're at an age where accidents are more likely? Falls, medical emergencies. I'm 72, not 92. I'm in excellent health. And if my daughter had expressed genuine concern about my safety, we could have discussed it like two adults. Instead, she chose to manipulate and deceive me." "But she was trying to help?" "No," Maggie interrupted. "She was trying to help herself. She told me herself. She has debt. She said I deserved to inherit the house anyway, so she was just moving up the timeline. Those are her words, not mine." Patricia's lawyer had no response to that. When Maggie stepped down from the witness stand, she felt something shift inside her. The weight that had been crushing her for the past few days became slightly lighter. She had told her truth. She had stood in front of a judge and a courtroom full of strangers and said, "This is what happened to me, and I refuse to be ashamed of it." The judge took a 30-minute recess to consider everything. When she returned, her decision was swift and decisive. "I am revoking the power of attorney effective immediately," the judge announced. "I am ordering an emergency restoration of Ms. Hayes's access to her home. I am freezing all financial accounts under Patricia Hayes's control, and I am ordering a full investigation by the state's Elder Abuse Task Force into the circumstances of this case. She looked directly at Patricia. Ms. Hayes, you exploited your mother's trust for financial gain. You used a legal document meant to protect her in case of incapacity as a weapon to steal from her. This court finds clear evidence of elder financial exploitation. Depending on the investigation's findings, you may face criminal charges. Patricia's lawyer was frantically whispering to her, but Patricia just stared straight ahead, her face a mask of shock and disbelief. Ms. Hayes, the judge turned to Maggie, you are free to return to your home today. I'm ordering new locks be installed by this afternoon, and your daughter will have no legal right to access the property. Is there anything you'd like to say? Maggie stood slowly. She looked at Patricia, at her daughter, the person she had loved unconditionally for 48 years. I want my daughter to understand that I didn't do this to punish her, Maggie said quietly. I did this because I had to. Because sometimes love isn't enough. Sometimes you have to draw a line and say no more. She paused. And I hope that someday, Patricia will understand what she did. I hope she'll feel genuine remorse. Because I'm her mother and I love her. But I can't let her hurt me anymore. As Maggie walked out of the courtroom, Rebecca beside her, she didn't look back at her daughter. Outside the courthouse, in the September sunshine, Maggie felt something she hadn't expected to feel again so soon: hope. She had her home back. She had her life back. And she had taken back her power. The weeks that followed the court hearing were a strange mixture of vindication and grief. Maggie returned to her home to find it exactly as she'd left it. The lace curtains still in the windows, her coffee cup still sitting on the kitchen table, the watercolor of autumn leaves still on her easel, untouched. But something had shifted in the house's energy. It no longer felt like a sanctuary, it felt like a crime scene. She had to walk through the rooms and deliberately reclaim them, reminding herself, this is mine. I am safe here. This is still my home. Rebecca had been right about the legal fight not being over. The state's Elder Abuse Task Force opened an investigation. Patricia's bank records were subpoenaed. It became clear, through careful examination of financial documents, that Patricia had been planning this for a long time. There were transfers of money from Maggie's account to Patricia's account, dating back 2 years. There were applications for home equity lines of credit on Maggie's property, all made in Patricia's name using the power of attorney. There were emails between Patricia and a real estate agent discussing the potential for liquidating the asset as soon as circumstances permitted. It was premeditated. It was calculated. It was criminal. We're building a very strong case, Rebecca told Maggie during one of their meetings. The prosecutor's office is taking this seriously. They're talking about charges, elder financial exploitation, fraud, attempted theft of property. Patricia could face significant prison time. Maggie felt a strange, complicated mix of emotions when Rebecca said that. Part of her wanted Patricia to face consequences. Part of her, the part that was still a mother, felt sick at the thought of her daughter in prison. But she also knew that sometimes consequences were necessary. Sometimes people had to understand the seriousness of what they'd done. David called her a week after the court hearing. Mom, I'm so sorry, he said immediately, his voice hoarse. I'm so sorry for what I did. I was an idiot. I didn't think. I just went along with Patricia because I didn't want to disappoint her, and I didn't realize. I know you didn't realize, Maggie said quietly. But you could have asked. You could have thought about what you were doing before you helped your sister lock your mother out of her home. I know. I know that now. Mom, I want to make it right. I want to testify against Patricia. I want to tell the judge that I didn't understand what was happening and that I regret it. Maggie was quiet for a long moment. Are you doing this because you're genuinely sorry, or because you're afraid of legal consequences? Both, David said honestly, but mostly because I'm genuinely sorry. Because I realized that what Patricia and I did, that was elder abuse, Mom. That was what happens to people on TV, and I never thought I would be a person who did that to their own mother. And I can't live with that. Then yes, Maggie said, you can testify, but David, I need you to understand something. I forgive you. But forgiveness doesn't erase what happened. And I'm going to need time before I can trust you the way I did before. I understand, David said quietly. I deserve that. I'm sorry, Mom, I'm really sorry. After they hung up, Maggie sat at her kitchen table and allowed herself to cry. Not tears of rage this time, but tears of complicated grief. She had her son back, but the relationship they'd had was changed, altered forever by what he'd done. She would rebuild it slowly, but it would never be quite the same. Patricia, meanwhile, had lawyered up properly. She hired a criminal defense attorney. She stopped responding to Maggie's lawyer. She stopped answering her phone. She retreated into silence. Maggie didn't see her daughter during those weeks. But she thought about her. She thought about the little girl Patricia had been, so full of joy and curiosity. She thought about the teenager Patricia had been, angry and confused and searching for her place in the world. She thought about the woman Patricia had become, desperate and scared and making terrible choices because she felt like her life was falling apart. None of that excused what Patricia had done, but it explained it, and understanding the explanation didn't make the betrayal hurt any less. 3 weeks after the court hearing, Maggie received a letter from Patricia. It was handwritten, on her daughter's favorite stationery, cream, colored paper with embossed borders. Maggie almost didn't open it, but something made her. Dear Mom, I don't know if you'll read this. I don't know if you'll even want to see my name right now. But I need to try. I'm sorry. I know those are just words and I know they don't change what I did. But I need you to know that I'm sorry. I was wrong. I was selfish and greedy and cruel and I was wrong. I don't know when I became the kind of person who would do this. I don't know when I started seeing you as a problem to be solved instead of my mother. But somewhere along the way, I lost myself. I got scared about my life, about my finances, about the future. And instead of dealing with that responsibly, I looked for someone to blame. And I looked at you. I convinced myself that I was helping you. That I was doing what was best for you. But the truth is, I was doing what was best for me. I was using you, and that's unforgivable. My lawyer says I shouldn't write this letter. She says I shouldn't say anything. But I'm writing it anyway. Because I need you to know that I understand what I did. I understand that I betrayed your trust. I understand that I hurt you. And I'm going to spend a long time trying to understand why I thought it was okay. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I'm not asking you to forget what happened. I'm just asking you to know that I know how wrong this was. I hope someday you'll let me try to be your daughter again. But I understand if you never can. With love and regret. Patricia. Maggie read the letter 3 times. She sat with it for a long time before doing anything. Then she picked up the phone and called Rebecca. I want to talk to Patricia, Maggie said. Before this goes any further, before the criminal case gets underway, I want to talk to my daughter. That's probably not advisable, Rebecca said carefully. Anything you say could be used. I don't care about legal strategy, Maggie interrupted. I'm her mother. Before this becomes a criminal matter that will define both our lives, I need to talk to her, as her mother, not as a victim and her abuser, as a mother and a daughter. Rebecca was quiet for a moment. Okay, she finally said. I'll arrange a mediated conversation, with a neutral third party present. That way you have support, but you also have privacy. They met 3 days later in a neutral space, a small office at a mediation center, with a professional mediator present to ensure things didn't escalate. Patricia looked smaller than Maggie remembered. She looked like she hadn't slept in weeks. Her eyes were red and swollen. She'd lost weight. When she saw her mother, she stood up, and for a moment, Maggie thought she would move toward her. But Patricia stayed where she was, leaving the distance between them intact. Hey. Mom, Patricia said quietly. Hi, sweetheart, Maggie said, and the words came with all the complicated love of a mother who has been hurt by her child but still loves her anyway. They sat across from each other, the mediator between them. I received your letter, Maggie said. I want you to know that I read it, and I believe that you're sorry. I am, Patricia said. I'm so sorry, Mom. I was going to ruin your life and steal your home, and I thought. I don't know what I was thinking. Why did you do it? Maggie asked. Not the excuses, not the rationalizations. Why, in your heart, did you think this was okay? Patricia was quiet for a long time. Because I was failing, she finally said. My marriage failed. My career isn't going anywhere. I have debt I can't pay off. I look at my life and I see nothing but failures and mistakes. And I looked at you and I saw someone who always did everything right. Someone who had security and stability and a beautiful home. And I thought, if I just had that, if I just had the money from the house, then my life would be fixed. Then I wouldn't be a failure anymore. Patricia, you're not a failure, Maggie said gently. You're a woman going through a difficult time. That doesn't make you a failure. That makes you human, but that's not an excuse for what I did. No, Maggie agreed. It's not. but it's an explanation. And I need to understand the explanation before I can move forward. They talked for an hour. Patricia told her about the debt, the medical bills from a hospitalization, from the credit card debt from trying to maintain a lifestyle she couldn't afford, the car payment, the mortgage. She told her about the shame of having to admit to her mother that her life wasn't working. She told her about the desperation she felt, the sense that she was running out of time. And Maggie listened. She didn't absolve her daughter of responsibility, but she listened with a mother's heart. "What's going to happen to you?" Patricia asked finally. "I don't know," Maggie said honestly. "That depends on what the prosecutor decides to do, but I want you to know something. I'm not going to testify against you. I'm going to let the evidence speak for itself, but I'm not going to stand in a courtroom and point at you and say, 'Punish my daughter.'" Patricia's face crumpled. "Why not?" "Because you're my daughter," Maggie said simply, "and I love you, even now, even after everything. I still love you." "I don't deserve that," Patricia whispered. "No," Maggie agreed. "You don't. But love isn't something you earn or deserve. It's something you're given. And I gave it to you 48 years ago when you were born, and I don't know how to stop." The mediation ended shortly after that. As Patricia was leaving, she turned back to look at her mother. "Mom," she said, "I'm going to get help. I'm going to see a therapist. I'm going to try to figure out why I became the kind of person who would do this." "That's good," Maggie said. "That's really good, Patricia. And maybe someday, maybe you could let me try to make it right." Maggie looked at her daughter, at the woman Patricia had become, and at the girl she used to be, and at all the potential versions of her daughter that might still exist. "Maybe," Maggie said, "but not today. Today, I just need to be her mother who loves her and who is disappointed in her and who hopes she can become better. Can you accept that?" "Yes," Patricia said. "Yes, I can accept that." After Patricia left, Maggie sat alone in the mediation office. The mediator had excused herself to give Maggie privacy. She sat with the complicated aftermath of the conversation, the pain, the compassion, the loss, the fragile hope that maybe, someday, they could rebuild something. She didn't know what would happen next. She didn't know if Patricia would be charged criminally. She didn't know if her daughter would actually follow through on getting help, or if this was another manipulation. She didn't know if they could ever have the kind of relationship they'd had before. But she knew one thing: she had stood in front of her daughter and told the truth. She had said, "I love you, but I can't let you hurt me anymore." And she had meant it. And that was enough for now. 3 months later, on a cold December morning, Maggie stood in her kitchen and looked at the world with eyes that had been transformed by fire. The criminal case against Patricia had been resolved. The prosecutor's office, taking into account Maggie's refusal to testify and Patricia's genuine expressions of remorse, had offered a plea deal: 2 years of probation, mandatory therapy, restitution, and a formal acknowledgement of elder financial exploitation. Patricia had accepted. She was attending therapy twice a week. She was attending financial counseling. She was attempting to rebuild her life, piece by piece. David had testified on Maggie's behalf during the preliminary hearing, admitting his role in the scheme and expressing genuine remorse. He'd also hired a therapist to explore why he'd been so easily manipulated by his sister. He was rebuilding his relationship with his mother slowly, carefully, with new boundaries and new honesty. But the legal resolution was almost secondary to what had happened to Maggie herself. She had changed. The woman who stood in this kitchen now was not the same woman who had been locked out of her home 3 months ago. That woman had been broken. This woman was broken open, which was entirely different. She had learned, through the crucible of betrayal, that she was stronger than she'd known. Free, she had learned that love and boundaries could coexist. She had learned that sometimes the people who hurt us most are the people we loved most. And that understanding why didn't mean accepting the harm. She had reclaimed her life, not by erasing what happened, but by choosing how she would move forward. The doorbell rang at 9 a.m. Maggie opened it to find Susan standing there with pastries and coffee, as she did every Saturday morning now. It had become their ritual. "Good morning, warrior," Susan said, kissing Maggie's cheek. "Good morning, friend," Maggie replied. They sat at the kitchen table, the same table where Maggie had sat 3 months ago, alone with her heartbreak. Now, with Susan across from her, it felt different. It felt like sanctuary again. "How are you feeling?" Susan asked. "Okay," Maggie said honestly. "Some days better than okay, some days still sad. But okay. Have you heard from Patricia? She sent me a text yesterday. She said her therapy is going well. She said she's working on understanding why she thought it was acceptable to do what she did. She said she understands it might take years before I can trust her again. And what did you say? I told her I was proud of her for doing the work, and I meant it. Susan reached across the table and squeezed Maggie's hand. You're an amazing woman. You know that, right? Most people would be consumed by anger. I am angry, Maggie said. I'm furious at what Patricia did. I'm furious at David for going along with it. But I'm also her mother. And his mother. And that doesn't go away just because they hurt me. After Susan left, Maggie took a long walk through her neighborhood. The autumn leaves had fallen, and winter was settling in. The world looked naked and raw and honest, all the secrets laid bare in the absence of green. She thought about the power of attorney that had started this whole thing. Rebecca had advised her to be very careful about who she gave power over her affairs to in the future. Trust, but verify, Rebecca had said, and never give anyone complete control. It was good advice. But it was also advice that came with a cost. It meant living with less trust. It meant looking for potential betrayal. It meant accepting that love and betrayal could come from the same person, at the same time. That was perhaps the hardest lesson of all. She walked past her friend Jennifer's house and saw her friend outside gardening, preparing the beds for winter. Jennifer waved and Maggie walked over. How are you holding up? Jennifer asked. Everyone in the neighborhood knew what had happened. The story had spread quickly, the way stories do. Better, Maggie said. Differently? But better? Are you going to forgive her? Patricia, I already have, Maggie said, and was surprised to realize it was true. Not because what she did was okay, it wasn't. But because holding on to the anger was hurting me more than it was hurting her. And I refused to give her that much power over me. Jennifer nodded slowly. That's very wise. It's not wise, Maggie said. It's necessary. There's a difference. When Maggie returned home, she found a package on her porch. It was from David. Inside was a framed photograph, a picture of Maggie and David from years ago at his daughter's 10th birthday party. Maggie was laughing, her arm around her granddaughter, pure joy radiating from her face. David was in the picture too, in the background, watching his mother and daughter with an expression of clear love. There was a note attached, Mom. I saw this picture while I was going through old photos, and I realized something. That woman in the picture, that's the woman I hurt. That's my mother. That's the woman who sacrificed everything for me, and I let Patricia convince me to betray her. I'm so sorry. I'm working on becoming the kind of son you deserve. But I wanted you to have this picture. I wanted you to remember who you are, not just after what happened, but before. You're that woman. You always will be. Love. David. Maggie sat on her porch and allowed herself to cry, good tears this time, healing tears. She cried for the woman in the photograph, who had loved so freely and trusted so completely. She cried for the woman she had become, who loved more cautiously and trusted more carefully. And she cried for the journey between the two. That evening, Maggie sat down at her easel and opened her sketch pad. She'd been avoiding painting since everything happened, but now she felt ready. She picked up her brush and began to paint. The image that emerged over the next 2 hours was not the autumn scene she'd been planning before Patricia's text. Instead, it was a woman sitting in a chair by a window, sunlight streaming in through lace curtains. The woman's face was peaceful, but there was something knowing in her expression, something that suggested she had survived something difficult and had come out the other side transformed. In the background, barely visible, were shadows, the ghosts of pain and betrayal. But they were in the background. They were not the main focus. The main focus was the light, the peace, the quiet strength of the woman in the chair. Maggie painted for hours, until her back ached and her eyes were tired. When she finally set down her brush and stepped back, she was satisfied. This was the story of what had happened to her. Not the story of a victim who had been destroyed, but the story of a woman who had been tested and had discovered her own resilience. 3 days later, Maggie volunteered to lead a workshop at the community center on Finding Your Power After Betrayal. She wasn't a therapist, and she didn't pretend to have all the answers. But she had lived through it, and she had come out the other side, and she thought maybe her story could help someone else who was standing where she had stood. The room was full. Women ranging in age from their 30s to their 80s. Some had been betrayed by family, some by friends, some by partners. All of them were searching for a way forward. Maggie stood in front of them and told her story. She didn't spare any details. She talked about the text message, the confusion, The shock, the anger, the mediation with Patricia. The complicated process of maintaining love while setting boundaries. I want you to know something, she said to the room. What happened to me was not okay. And what might have happened to you is not okay either. But it doesn't have to define the rest of your story. You get to decide how this ends. You get to decide whether you're going to be a victim forever, or whether you're going to be a survivor. A woman in the front row raised her hand. But how do you do that? How do you just decide? It's not easy, Maggie admitted. And it's not quick. And some days you have to decide again. But you do it by choosing to believe that you're worth fighting for. That your life has value. That your dignity matters. And then you fight for those things even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. After the workshop, several women stayed behind to talk to her. One elderly woman, probably in her 80s, hugged Maggie and said, "Thank you. I've been angry at my daughter for 5 years, and I never knew how to let it go. You've given me permission to move forward." Maggie hugged her back. "You gave yourself that permission," she said. "I just reminded you that it was possible." That night, Maggie received a call from her brother Michael. "I'm so proud of you," he said. "I've been hearing about the workshop you did. About you sharing your story publicly. It felt like the right thing to do," Maggie said. "I felt like if I could help someone else avoid what I went through, or help someone else who's going through it now, then maybe some good could come out of this mess." "That's very generous," Michael said, "especially considering." "Considering what?" "Considering that Patricia could have destroyed you. And instead, you've built something from the ashes. That takes a special kind of strength." After they hung up, Maggie looked around her home. At the walls she and Robert had painted together. At the garden visible through the window. Dormant now, but ready to bloom again in spring. At the photograph of David and her granddaughter. At the new painting on her easel, the woman in the chair, peaceful and strong. She thought about the title of that painting. She didn't have one yet, but she knew what it should be. Home, because that's what she had reclaimed. Not just the physical structure of the house, though that was part of it, but her sense of home, her sense that she was safe, that she was valued, that she belonged in her own life. The locks had been changed by someone else, but Maggie had changed them again, and this time she held the key. Epilogue 1 year later. On a September morning, exactly 1 year from the day Patricia had sent that terrible text, Maggie stood in her kitchen with a cup of coffee and a sense of peace that had become her new normal. Patricia was in her final month of probation. She had completed her therapy requirements. She had repaid all the money she'd attempted to steal. She and Maggie had begun to have careful, structured conversations, not frequent and not returning to the old closeness they'd once had, but honest and real. David had rebuilt his relationship with his mother. It would never be quite what it had been, but it was healing. He had his own therapy, his own work to do on understanding why he'd been so easily manipulated by his sister. Maggie had become known in her community as a woman who had survived betrayal and come out stronger. She continued to lead workshops. She continued to volunteer. She continued to paint. Most importantly, she continued to live. She lived fully and authentically, with boundaries and with love, with anger and with compassion, with grief and with joy. She was no longer afraid of being hurt. She had been hurt, catastrophically, by the people she loved most. And she had survived it, she had transformed it. She had learned from it. And she would never, ever take that strength for granted again. As she sat at her kitchen table that September morning, watching the sunlight stream through the lace curtains she'd hung there so many years ago, Maggie allowed herself a moment of gratitude. She was grateful for her health. She was grateful for her friends. She was grateful for her home. She was grateful for the capacity to love. Even after being hurt, she was grateful for the strength she'd discovered in herself. And perhaps most of all, she was grateful that she had learned this critical truth. The locks that were changed didn't determine her value. The people who hurt her didn't get to write her story. The betrayal didn't erase all the good that had come before. She was still the woman in the photograph, but she was also more than that now. She was a survivor. She was a fighter. She was a woman who had looked into the face of her own devastation and had refused to be destroyed by it. She was, in every way that mattered, home. And she was just beginning.